This is a University of Otago podcast.
My job today is to introduce to you Nicholas McBryde, who is going to be our convener. He's third from the left, my left. And he's also our director of the Otago Arts Festival, which is happening this year. Just one little sort of plug for us at the end, after you've had a cup of tea and a chat and discussion. Victoria Robson from Te Papa is going to be talking about the Dura exhibition she curated downstairs. So that's like a little extra if you have the time. Meanwhile, let's get on with the show.
Thank you, Linda. Welcome. It's nice to see you all here for this Meet the Fellows. The way we thought we would run this afternoon is that I'll ask each of the fellows to talk a little bit about themselves, about where they've come from, how they've arrived where they are, and during that time, if any of the other fellows has a comment that they wish to make about what one of their other fellows has said, they're welcome so to do. And then when we've been through all the fellows, I'll then open it to the floor for anybody who might have some questions that they might wish to ask any of the fellows. So in no particular order, but just from my right to left, the fellows, I'll introduce them all to you before we start. We have Suzanne Cowan, who is the Carolyn Plummer Community Dance Fellow, Joanna Langford, who's the Francis Hodgkins, Michele Powles, who's the Burns Fellow. We have Trebilcock, who is the College of Education Creative New Zealand Children's Writer in Residence. I got it right? Yep, thank you. And we have Chris Archer, who's Mozart.
Adams.
The Mozart. Chris Adams, who's the Mozart Fellow. Sorry. Yeah. So we'll start with Suzanne, and simply ask her how she's arrived at this point in her career. Over to you.
Okay, so I'm Suzanne, and I've been involved in contemporary dance for probably about the last 11 years. I danced as a child and as a teenager, and didn't really see that dance was any suitable career for anyone, really. And then when I was 22, I acquired a new form of mobility. I was involved in an accident and lost the use of my legs. And it wasn't until 11, 12 years ago, I saw Touch Compass Dance Company, which is a mixability dance company based in Auckland. And I saw them perform, and it's like a whole new door opened, and I realised that actually, yes, I would like to dance again, and I could dance in a chair and actually out of a chair as well. So I started my career in contemporary dance sort of at the age of 30, so it's never too late. And I'm still dancing in my 40s, and I worked for a company, an international company based in London called Canduco Dance Company, 3.5 years, and I've also worked in New Zealand, and the last 6 years I've been making my own work, choreographing my own work, and last year I completed a Masters in Dance at Auckland University, and here I am doing the Carolyn Plummer Community Dance Fellowship.
So being a dancer with a disability, as opposed to being a dancer without one in your early career, was there a period of the physical thing is one side, but the intellectual or the emotional or the artistic side, was there a difficult journey starting again or learning over again or dancing in a different kind of way?
I mean, I think that it took me a little while, a wee bit to get my head around it. I mean, I'd been, since my accident, I'd been quite physically active, and for example, I played wheelchair tennis competitively for a while, and I was also sailing, kayaking, sort of doing a sort of tried out quite a range of sports. So I was used to being quite physically active, and I knew that there were lots of things that I could do. I think aesthetically, at first when I started dancing, I just kind of thought, oh, what does this look like? Does it look any good? And sort of like, is it valid? Somehow, is it good enough? Can we actually call this art? And so there were those questions in my head. And there was sort of, because I danced before, there was kind of a bit of a frustration around, I knew how this would feel as an able-bodied person, and now I was trying to sort of do it in a chair. And so there was a sense of, there was a sense of, this would be so much easier out of the chair for a wee while. But again, I guess it was a little bit like learning to play wheelchair tennis, because I'd also played tennis as an able-bodied person, and at first it's like, oh my God, how on earth am I going to coordinate this racket with the chair? But actually, after a while, it just becomes second nature. So, and to me, that sort of demonstrates that as human beings, how incredibly creative and adaptable we are. Yeah.
So you overcame that sort of sense of frustration, obviously. Is there the kind of choreography that you now do, are you doing it with people with disabilities or not with disabilities, or both, or what?
With both, yeah, actually. I think one of my particular interests I've sort of developed is disability as a creative platform, because I think actually essentially people with disabilities are incredibly creative just by the nature of sort of living in a world which is usually not set up for them, and so they have to be incredibly laterally to find out different ways of doing things. So intrinsically, I think they are incredibly creative. And then I think that if you can just sort of take that one step further and find an artistic angle. So I work with both, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in actual fact, I think you've actually done a collaboration with last year's Carolyn Plummer, Sean.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Sean Curran. Yeah, Sean Curran and I have worked together on and off for a few years. He choreographed a show and I was in a duet with him about 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, and we're going to be doing another sort of collaboration quite shortly.
So doing a duet with Sean, does that require a different kind of trust or something, or respect? Him being able-bodied?
From...
Well, I don't know.
Sorry?
Is there a dog involved? Because that was his project last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just imagine that it could be quite difficult for an able-bodied person to be on the same sort of plane or wavelength.
Not really.
No.
I think... in essence, the task is the same, no matter what your body is.
Okay.
You're sort of finding your own sort of unique way of moving, and really the essentials are the same no matter what the body is. So not really. I think there are as with, with any dancers that get together and collaborate, there's a time, if you haven't worked together, that you have to just find out about each other's bodies and how they move. And really that's the same for any pair of dancers. But I think there's a lot of given assumptions that, when you're working with another able-bodied dancer that you would have, that suddenly it disrupts all those assumptions about how your body might move. But I think actually, for example, with Sean, that was really interesting, that he really valued that and found that really interesting. And actually, I think that made the duet really work well. Yeah.
Good. Thank you, Suzanne. Is the levels working for everybody? Okay, good. Joanna Langford. Frances Hodgkins, on my right.
Hi. Yes, so I'm the Frances Hodgkins Fellow for the year. I'm here in Dunedin until February. The sort of start of my art career, it was I grew up in a sort of remote farm in Gisborne, and was an avid hut maker as a child, which sort of eventually grew into my art career as a installation artist. I did a degree in visual arts at Wintec in Hamilton. and after I'd left school, and then I carried on to do a master's in fine art and painting at Canterbury University, and since then I've been exhibiting work throughout New Zealand mainly, and have participated in a couple of different residencies. I've done a few, I did a residency in Iceland 2 years ago, and also one in Scotland, and so my practice is I work with found and recycled materials, and make them into a sort of magical real landscapes. And the most recent work that I've made was for a show at the Douse Gallery in Wellington, and it's made of a whole lot of silage wrap that I've been collecting from around the farms in Dunedin, and weaving them through a wire mesh to make a really large sort of landscape, about 5 metres by 5 metres. And this work stands on sort of a scaffolding made out of kebab sticks, and is about about 6 metres high. So they're very big and slightly flimsy installations, often with little lights and ladders, and so that's my my latest project, and I've this year also working on my first outdoor project. I'm making a work for the Scape Biennale in Christchurch, and that's going to be installed in September. And that's also going to be a work made out of the silage wrap, and it's going to stand on about a 20-metre high mast, so it's going to be pretty tall, and
with an installation, that one you described there on the little sticks, there's another one in the Christchurch Art Gallery at the moment. I saw a review for it in the Listener. Very, very fragile work with little sticks and stairways to heaven and little lights and things. I guess all those kinds of installations have to be created in situ. So do you plan it for months and months and then just beaver away there on site? And then what happens when it's finished? Because I can't imagine many of them are very movable. You couldn't get a freight company to come in and pick it up and take it away, because it would simply fall apart, I would think.
Yeah, they're actually a lot more stable than they look. But usually I will. I do a lot of Photoshop drawings first of all, so I'll have the image of the gallery space that I'm going to be working in, and then I will sort of build works in Photoshop and explore the sort of space and scale a little bit that way, and then I'll usually decide on the materials and the components that I'm going to use for a particular project, and so I'll make 100 kebab stick ladders and 20 little cardboard stairs, or whatever sort of components that I've decided to use, and then I will then I usually have, for a big project, I usually have about 2 weeks to install in situ. So then I take all the components along and will work in a kind of more spontaneous way, constructing the work according to the particulars of the space. And and then usually after I've finished, after the work's finished, I'll often reuse components, but essentially the whole work is taken down, and I mean, I've reinstalled a couple of installations, but they're usually just sort of, they're not the exact work, they're variations of the work.
So when you, having done that, what does that, having having spent so much time creating a work, ultimately when it's dismantled, it's actually destroyed. So that's the end of it. Is that good? Does that feel good?
Yeah, well, it doesn't really feel like that it's destroyed to me. It feels like my work is kind of a continuous project, and when I install the work, it's kind of a bit of a full stop, and then it continues on to evolve into a different sort of outcome. Yeah. So.
Okay. And when you're creating this work in the gallery, how do you respond or cope with an audience? Because I presume if you're going to spend 2 weeks building something, you've got the general public wandering by, passing comments and things, do they, or not?
It depends, because often, the gallery will close off the space, and so there's not too much interaction, or I'll be up an access lift and not really communicative in that way. But yeah, no. So there's not too much interaction.
Thank you, Joanna. Michele Powles, Burns Fellow.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I didn't know that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up, which is always the first question everybody asks me. I was a dancer for a long time, and in fact danced with Suzanne for a while with Touch Compass. Although my mother tells me recently, she's just revealed to me that apparently I did win writing competitions when I was a child, but I have no recollection. I've got the books with like prize things in them, but I didn't realise that I had written when I was younger. So I didn't know that I wanted to be a writer. I did know that I wanted to make cool stuff happen. So I spent most of my, adult years trying to make cool stuff happen, and that took various forms all around the world. I worked as a dancer in the UK and worked in various places, Brazil and Bosnia, doing community work with an artistic focus, and then came back to New Zealand and danced and produced dance for quite a long time. And then for some reason I was looking for a venue for a new dance work, and found a small blurb about Pencarrow Lighthouse, which is this place in Wellington. I was looking for a historic building to do a dance work in, but this paragraph got hold of me, and the ghost of Lighthouse Past must have infiltrated my bones, because this character kind of got hold of me, and I thought that I was going to be making a new dance piece, and then I thought, oh, maybe this will be a film, and in fact it turned out that it was a novel, and my writing career kind of started from there, really. The writing the novel Weathered Bones, which came out last year, was the thing that triggered my desire to want to keep writing. And then once I'd started, I discovered that I really, really wanted to be a writer when I grew up. So I'm trying to do that now. Yeah, that's potted history.
So are you grown up yet?
I don't know. I'm still working on that. Yeah.
Isn't it interesting, though, that, it sounds to me as if you've actually just stumbled upon this career, this present part of your journey.
Yeah, well, I guess I have always been a communicator, is how I boil it down to, because when I worked in the UK, I studied law initially, and everybody in the UK found it hilarious that I was a dancing lawyer, although I did meet a tap dancing lawyer as well, so that was okay. But for me, when I look at my career, when I do sort of author talks in schools and things, when I look at my career, it is actually a really clear trajectory path of communication. I wanted to make stuff happen. My chosen form for a while was dance. Then I was creating other people's dance works. I worked in corporate world for a while, sort of doing marketing and PR and that sort of thing. But it was always about making stories happen. So I guess that's where it's all come together, and I have since discovered that the writing thing is what really makes my heart sing. So that's become the focus, and as soon as it became the focus, it really clicked. And I had always struggled as a dancer being good at the writing part of, what a work was and the producing part, and all of those things had never really come together so cohesively until I went, I'm a writer. That makes much more sense.
Yes, in actual fact, I remember I first met you as a publicist.
Yes,
weren't
and
you?
producer of Dance of Touch Compass. Yeah.
So now sitting down at the Otago University, what do you do all day? I mean, do you sit and muse, or are you disciplined? I mean, how does a writer write? Because you hear all kinds of stories about the routines or not, or writer's block, or inspirations that they get from goodness knows where.
Yeah.
So do you have a disciplined way of working?
I do, to a certain extent. I mean, the great thing about these fellowships, certainly for me, and I imagine from speaking with the others, is that because you have this big chunk of time to just write or compose or make art or dance, and that is your sole and solitary focus, your routine becomes much more cemented or much more formalised and much more, for me anyway, productive. So basically, as a writer, I just write. So I get up in the morning and I write, and then I have lunch, and then I might read or go for a walk, and then I write a bit more, and then it's the evening. So I have written quite a lot since I've been down here, and people have said to me, "Oh, how do you do that?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know very many people, and so I just write, and you don't have any friends, and you're writing, and so you do lots of writing." Really?
Sounds quite sad, doesn't it? Really. So is it scary? I mean, I presume you're actually writing something, are you?
Yes. I'm not pontificating about my navel.
You've got something in mind. Yes. You've got a novel, presumably.
Yes.
So does it worry you when it's not moving, or is it moving nicely?
Well, it's
always?
moved along very nicely.
Yeah.
It's in fact almost finished, so that's all good. It's being read at the moment. So if it wasn't, perhaps it would be worrying. But there are some people that take 40 years to write a novel. So to write it, in 3 months or something, I don't feel too worried about it.
Okay.
And I guess it comes back to that thing I was saying earlier, and that everything has clicked since I started writing properly. So I find it immensely fun and satisfying and frustrating when I'm not writing. And I used to have friends come around and go, "It's a lovely day, come on, let's go out. It'd be good for you to write." And I'm like, "But I'm having fun, I'm writing, go away." So, yeah, I'm not very scintillating company when I'm really in the thick of something. But I'm very new at this, so, I can wax lyrical for ages. I'm sure if I've been doing this for 20 years, it's probably a completely different story.
And for example, with the work that you're doing now, courtesy of Otago University, when you're happy with it and when you've got the manuscript, that's only the beginning, isn't it?
Yes.
Really. So that's when after that is when the frustration probably sets in, does it? Because, having created something, it's not a book until it's turned into a book. Otherwise, it's just a manuscript, So how does that work for you as a writer, as a creator?
Well, I'm very lucky in that currently I'm publishing with Penguin, and they're very lovely and charming and supportive. And, I'm new, and so it's all very exciting. But, so it is a long process. So from submitting your manuscript, I gave it to my editor already. I've already given it to my editor once, and he's come back and said, "Oh, I love this character, but I don't really like this character. But I love how they work together at the end. So, I don't know, maybe you could think about it." So there's that process of feedback, and then there's the process of, whether they decide how they're going to take it or when they're going to take it. And this is, a process of months, takes months. And then there's the cover design. People always ask you, "How did you come up with the cover?" And actually, the publisher comes to you and go, "Here's a nice cover, don't you think?" And you go, "Oh yeah, it's great." So, all of those things take a long time. And I said to my publisher, when he said, "Oh yeah, I really like this, do you think it would come out this year?" And he's like, "No, not a chance." So should they take it on, and yes, it's definitely coming out, it won't even come out this year. So things just take a long time.
And therefore you must have great trust, though, or faith in your editor who's reading it at the moment, for him or her to come back and say, "Do this, do that, do the next thing." Changing your creation, aren't they?
Yes. That is always a hard thing. We were talking about that earlier, and I'm sure we'll talk about it some more about, working for your creating work for your audience and ignoring your audience at the same time. But, ultimately, in this case anyway, my editor is the person that publishes it. So if he doesn't like it, it's not going to get published with him. Certainly, I could always send it somewhere else. But the market and the audience in New Zealand is quite small, so you have limited opportunity to send it in various directions. And as I say, I'm very new at this, so I have to, match my aspirations with where things can go.
Yeah, you got to work in the real world, don't you? Yeah. Thank you, Michele. Karen Trebilcock, who is the, as I said, College of Education Creative New Zealand children's writer in residence.
Hi. I started out as a journalist when I was 17 at the Southland Times, and it's really because of the wonderful people I worked with there, who I didn't think of wonderful at the time, that I'm probably here today, because if anything, they taught me that you write for an audience. And in Southland Times, we wrote for the Southland Otago housewife, who probably wouldn't have done school cert. So that was very much an audience that you wrote for. In other words, you wrote language that people could understand. And I went from being a journalist to gradually becoming a fiction writer, which always makes me laugh. Like even on TV now, you talk about TV1 or TV3, they do stories on the news. Oh, we were never allowed to do fiction or stories or something as a journalist, but now it's commonplace, that term. And I think it's always been an audience that I've been thinking about when I write. So after being a journalist for a while, I started actually teaching drama. The community I was living in was needing a drama teacher for children. So we needed some work. We wanted something local that they were interested in, so I started writing for them. And that ended up with school journals, and that was my first royalty cheque, which was a whole $250, which I still remember fondly, receiving this huge amount of money that I'm sure Steven Spielberg would have loved the play, but not to be. And then I started mucking around writing novels, and then I ended up writing the Thieves trilogy, which the last book came out last year. So it was with Longacre here in Dunedin. Very lucky to have the local publishing company, to be a new writer and to actually be able to climb the stairs and actually talk to these people who are putting your words into a book was absolutely fantastic. And I think as a city we will long miss having that opportunity. And then I got this residency, which has been fantastic for actually concentrating the mind to actually write full time in every sense of the word, and not having a part-time job or anything else, to actually be able to sit and write and concentrate on projects has been fantastic. And that's about it. I've written my project. When you apply for the Children's Writing Residency Fellowship, you actually have to apply with a project, the first chapter, what's going to happen in the book. So I've written that, and it's getting read at the moment by a publisher, and they will get round to reading it any day now, and will get back to me any day. So yeah,
the long waiting bit.
The long waiting bit. Yes, and like if you. What Michele was saying about, I talked to a group a month ago, and they just thought that if you have finished a book, if you have actually got to the end, then automatically it should get published, because how hard is that to do? And it was like, if only that was the case. Publishing at the moment is extremely hard with the world recession, if any writer will tell you. So to get it actually even into the door for a publisher to read it is like, yes, so hopefully, fingers crossed. Because I think that's the worst thing about with the other residencies, that there is the automatic, like the dance is done and the art is done and the music, but it's like I could write this novel and it never gets published, and it's like, oh, why do they ever give it to me? So that's probably one of the big stresses with having this.
So how do you write? Are you disciplined? Do you sit down every day and spend hours writing and worry when it's not coming together, or when your characters take over or go the wrong way?
I think with that journalism background I treat it as a job. It is, and the great thing about residency is that I have an office with a computer and a phone and a nice view of the Leith, and so I get to work about 9:15 after saying goodbye to the husband and putting the children on the school bus, and I get here and I start writing, and sometimes there's something to do at lunchtime and sometimes there's not, and you just keep on writing until it's time to go home. So that is, and if you ask me maybe at 11 o'clock what has happened to the last hour, it's like, that was 500 words ago.
Right.
So, yeah, it's very much you sit down and you write because you have to, because if you don't do it, no one else is going to, as simple as no one else is going to do it for you. If you don't sit down and write, then it's not going to get written. So it's a matter of having to, or you're not a writer.
You talked about needing, or from where you come from, writing for an audience, and therefore that's the way you actually create now too, very much with your audience in mind. I wonder if I might dare ask some of the other fellows how they think of their creativity or their work in relation to whether it's for you as artists, or whether it's for an audience, or it's a combination of two, or where the compromises have to occur to make it work or not. Because I just remember one fellow we had here some 2 years ago, I think it was, or well, the last 2 years actually. The Mozart fellow made the comment that he wrote his music for himself. And he didn't mind, in fact, he wasn't really interested in whether anybody else listened to it or not. And that's a interesting way of creating, when in actual fact he wasn't sharing his creativity with anybody else. So, do you all do that, or do you do it for everybody?
I think it's a very difficult one, and I mean it's an interesting kind of concept, because I mean at one level you've got your audience, but then you've also got the promoters and the people that actually stage the work or whatever, and so and they have various things that they have to consider, and so I mean often there'll be, I mean, or things like you might have someone that is sort of judging it on its aesthetic merit or whatever, and so you might have something that's very well regarded by a public, but that never actually gets to the public because the steps that it has to go through before that to get to the public, there are enough people that don't like it or don't relate to it. And I think, I mean, it's very difficult to appeal to everyone. And that, I mean, you're always going to have someone that, I mean, you might write a piece of music which some people really love, but the majority of people can't stand and don't understand why anyone would actually listen to it. I've been lucky this year. I've taken some of the Stage 2 composition classes, and as part of that I've played them a lot of very extreme music, and invariably after I play something by Stockhausen or Ligeti or Cage or any of these sort of very sort of prominent 60s composers who were writing in sort of the extreme sort of European avant-garde style, you would have students would say, well, why would someone actually go along to a concert of this? Why would they listen to it? And I think there is often, you can find a lot of validity in these statements. They're not necessarily things that you would sort of go, well, I'm going to go and listen to this because I feel like having a nice sort of enjoyable listen to something. But at the same time, they're very powerful works and they can be extremely engaging, but you sort of have to, you're listening to it for different reasons. You're not sort of listening to it as nice sort of background music to sort of soothe you sort of to sleep or something like that. And it might be the sort of the immediacy of the sort of extreme expression that can then actually have a lot of impact.
See, I think that audiences, and I think that Karen touched on this, that that it's the steps that you go through before you get to the masses can be daunting. You know, and if you don't have a publisher or an editor who actually likes what you're writing, what do you do about it?
You can always self-publish.
Self-publish, okay, yeah. So do you, and Michele, do you actually capitulate to an editor because they know the market, they know what the audience wants, and therefore you write something that you're told to write rather than, I mean, of course, the story was yours originally, but you've got to massage it into such a way that it's going to then work for an audience?
Well, Well, I think there's different types of audiences as well, because when I think about when I write, I'm writing something that comes from the characters. It's not something that I'm consciously necessarily thinking about, but whether it's a literary audience or a popular audience or a library-going audience or a book-buying audience, there are all these different audiences, and your publisher, just talking in literary terms, has different parameters that they're trying to fit. They might think of you as a literary author, and so they're, encouraging you in that direction, or they might think that actually if you change this a little bit, maybe it would be more genre writing or something like that. So, yes, there are those things to think about, but it's a little bit of a matter of give and take, I think, that you know what your story is, and at the end of the day, you're the only one. Your name has to go on it, and you're the one that has to own it. So if you don't agree with your editor or publisher, then maybe you just have to go, well, that's great, but I'm off. See ya. And, yes, maybe then that book doesn't get published, but if it did get published in that way, maybe you would hate it, and what's the fulfillment in that in any way?
I think there's also the publisher knows their audience rather than the audience.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's all different audiences.
A publisher will have a very specific, because of the type of books that they publish, the audiences will know that if they go to that publisher, then that's the sort of book that they'll get.
And especially in New Zealand, the New Zealand audience is often, New Zealand book audience certainly is often thought of as a sort of a literary audience, but there are all these other readers in New Zealand, and then there's the whole world. So, you might decide there are some authors in New Zealand that sell really fantastically overseas and don't sell anything in New Zealand. And so which is better? And so there are all those things to consider. But if, as I have started to, and I'm sure most writers who aspire to make a career out of it, I mean, there are very few writers in New Zealand that are full-time writers, but if you really want it, you have to be writing the stuff that makes you excited, because you're not, you're earning tens of dollars, you're not earning hundreds of thousands of dollars. So if you're not enjoying it, go and work in a cafe.
Yeah, I think as a visual artist, I mean, I make work for an audience, but not necessarily for an audience that is going to be buying my work, because a lot of my work is ephemeral, and I don't make any money pretty much out of that. And so for me, I have made the decision that I will always have a part-time job that's going to be funding my work, or else, get money other ways like residencies and things like that. And in that way, I can always I don't have the pressure of making objects that are saleable, but I can, make really big installations or whatever. But yes, but I don't have that sort of pressure of making money from selling it. Yeah.
So, but I guess that if you've got a contract, if you've got a commission from a certain gallery, then you know what kind of expectations are.
There's other, there's sort of...
So that the gallery is the audience in this case, sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes,
Contemporary dance, on the other hand...
Well, actually, there was a dance symposium on last week, and someone mentioned the term the gift economy, and so really dance really falls into that category of a gift economy, where you make something and you give it to the community or the audience, because you really don't make any money out of it, although I am trying to find ways of doing that. And I mean, for myself, I make something that's interesting to me, and I just hope that it appeals to other people. And usually it does. So it's worked out quite well so far. But I think that essentially I have to do something that really excites me, and because trying to please everyone, as Michele said, is impossible. At the same time, I do sort of feel that you have to sort of allow people some way into a work, and if it's too obtuse, and I've seen that quite a bit in the arts, it's only a very select few that get it. And I'm kind of a little bit against that sort of artistic elitism, because I think it's, Yeah, I just think at the end of the day, who are you making it for? And that essentially you do want some kind of an audience. And again, just to allow people some way into it without compromising what you want to do too much. So it's a really fine balance, I think, to kind of hold those two goals.
Thank you.
I just think also, to expand my audience idea was that as a children's writer, maybe it's partly so, or I'm also a mother of teenage boys, that you kind of feel you have the morals of the world in your hands when you write for children, that you do want to make them aspire to be the best they can be, to be adventurous, to take life on. And I think as a writer, that's something I'm feeling more and more. The more I write, the more I am trying to inspire kids and to do the right thing. The last thing I want to do is write a gloomy book for teenagers and then they despair about the world. So that my audience sense there is very strong, that I am writing for this group, this small teenage select group who, and like teenagers, their major focus is sex and death and finding love and money. That's okay, we're all like that, but teenagers just seem to concentrate so much more on those things and to balance that with morals and still have adventure and inspire them. Is what I try.
Problem you too, because you're not just writing for the teenage audience, you're writing for the people who buy the books, for the teenage
parents.
For the parents, yes, definitely. And I do, like I remember as a child, my mother picking up one of my library books and actually finding a sex scene in it when I was 12, and the horror on her face and the equal horror on mine. Yes, so I have remember things like that. But God, it was a good book. So it is very hard because, of course, the publisher is actually an adult as well. So there's mixed audiences.
Chris Adams, we haven't given you the floor formally yet. Mozart Fellow.
I suppose as far as how I got into composition, I started playing the violin when I was 5, and I was involved in choirs and orchestras from quite an early age, and so music's always sort of been a very kind of natural part of my life, and so I suppose from that point, there's sort of I've always had I've had a battle which I've gradually won with my parents as to getting a real job, and so in that sense, I've gradually kind of convinced them, I think, that actually what I'm doing is a worthwhile sort of endeavour. And I mean, we certainly sort of began the process with sort of medicine and then perhaps science, and then if we weren't going to do science, then maybe performance would be sort of credible, and then maybe if not performance, then maybe teaching, and then and so, but we've sort of got to the point now that they're sort of, I think, quite proud of the fact that I am a composer, it is sort of a unusual sort of career path, in that Michele was saying, that you sort of, if you look at it in the sort of general terms, there is sort of a definite trajectory, and that you sort of kind of have these kind of general goals that you'd like to achieve, or a sort of direction that you'd like to be going in, and you sort of somehow find things that sort of take you in that general path. And I mean, certainly for me, I know when I was studying at the University of Canterbury, probably in about 1998 or so, we had one of the Mozart Fellows at that time came through, and so I sort of put that in the back of my mind as something that I'd love to do when I was sort of old enough, and that
grown up enough. Well,
no, there's actually a specific age limit for the Mozart Fellow, so you sort of have to go and do other things first. Which is quite useful in some ways, because it means that you've developed a lot more of the networks and things that you need And so following study, I spent a little bit of time overseas working at a specialist music school over in Wells in Somerset. And that was quite a sort of eye-opening experience in that the music staff in that school, I think there were about 90 people that were teaching on the music staff. And the specialist music students had 2.5 hours of lessons a week, and that was sort of from the age of 8. And so you had this very high-pressured sort of thing where you'd have sort of a 10-year-old boy doing sort of a viola concerto, and sort of afterwards bursting into tears because he'd made 2 mistakes or something. And because it's just completely sort of, there's just this massive pressure. And then I sort of came back and I taught a bit to keep my parents happy. Then last year I was given the Auckland Philharmonia Composer in Residence. And so with that, I was able to write a number of pieces for them and have them performed. And then this year, the Mozart Fellowship. And so I've been able to sort of continue working full-time writing music.
It sounds as if your audience starts with your parents, perhaps. Pleasing your audience, pleasing your parents first.
No, I kind of, I mean, they are most easily convinced by other people. So if I convince other people, then and it gets back to them, then they do it quite.
Just a little mafia working for you there. Yeah. So in your role at Otago University, what's your routine as a creative person, as a writer of music? Are you writing? Are you doing something?
Yes,
I hope so.
I think
why and how.
One of the things that I think you tend to find a little bit with the arts, particularly with the arts where you're sort of where it's linked to other people performing it, and this applies actually in all disciplines, including sort of the more popular kind of culture things. I know I was talking to Don McGlashan, and he was saying you tend to keep yourself very busy because you're afraid to say no, because if you say no, you kind of always feel that there's this sense that all the things you're doing might dry up, and then you'd have nothing to do. Or no opportunities to write for things that will get performed and things, and so it's often very difficult to say no to things. Sort of the majority of my focus here has been working on projects in which there's sort of a linked performance. So I had a piece earlier in the year that was performed by the Otago Symphonic Band, and that they were doing a concert in May, and similarly a Christchurch-based group had a concert in May that I wrote for Silencio. I've got a piece being performed next year by the Auckland Philharmonia, and as part of that process there are several workshops this year, and sort of other similar works, a piece for the New Zealand Trio that is scheduled for performance for next year. So in some ways, I think one of the things that has been quite nice about the Mozart Fellowship is because I came from the Auckland Philharmonia residency, which had very set requirements. I sort of knew what I needed to have written by the beginning of February, what I needed to have written by the beginning of March, what I needed to have written by the beginning of April, sort of from December the year before. And so you sort of got, I got into the habit of working at quite a sort of high sort of productive rate of actually producing things. I think there is a certain element, again, like Michele, that you tend to be a little bit antisocial. And I suppose in some ways, particularly if I've got a family, so that kind of tends to make you a little bit more social. and that you sort of have to kind of fit into other people's routines. But certainly if they're away or anything for some reason, then I'm quite happy working in my office at the university until 11 p.m. on a Friday night or whatever. Although it's much noisier then for some reason. And that, you sort of get all the students trawling down from the halls of residence down to the different pubs. And so you get lots of sort of external sort of sounds. But I tend to work most days in my office. My son's at daycare, and so drop him off into daycare and then go into the office and work there. Yeah.
Is there a requirement in your fellowship to actually produce something?
No,
there isn't. Great.
Well, no. You have to be working full time, and you don't even have to report other than in general terms about the fellowship. So. You don't sort of, and it specifically says you may be asked to report in general terms on the fellowship, but specifically not on what you've actually done.
Okay, that's what you're doing today here, I guess.
Yes, maybe. Yeah.
So the freedom that it gives you must be quite different from when you were at the APO, where you actually had to produce a specific work for a symphony orchestra by a certain date. How do you do that? Do you just sit down and do it? What's your muse?
Yeah, well, obviously the advantage was something like the orchestra one last year was that I knew that I had to have a 20-minute orchestral piece written by the beginning of February. They were going to read through it in March, and then they were going to perform it in September. So I knew that I needed to have it done by the 1st of February. They'd play it through. I could then say, no, that bit needs to be changed or whatever. Whereas here, I've sort of, and I suppose partly to the way in which I've worked, is that I've sort of sought out those sorts of performances. And so, but part of the advantage of the flexibility of the fellowship is that I met Errol Moore, who's a conductor of the Otago Symphonic Band, in February this year, and he said, "Oh well, we're doing a concert in May. Do you have anything for Otago for a symphonic band?" And I said, "No, but I'm happy to write you something." And so that meant I sort of had a month or something to write that piece, so that they then had time to rehearse it. And at the same time, I was also writing 2 other pieces. But again, that sort of unwillingness to say no to an opportunity meant that you just sort of squeezed it in, and so it meant that it was quite a busy period. But and having 3 concurrent projects, which were completely different. Creatively was quite an interesting thing, but I mean, again, I'd sort of had to do that in Auckland as well. Whereas in the past, I'd sort of tended to have one project and that would finish, and then I'd start the next project.
But it's quite good for a creator, isn't it, to actually have a reason to do it, have a deadline, to have a commission, which keeps you working hard, rather than just sitting around making it up.
I suppose the other extreme, though, is, I mean, you
think
can,
of Sibelius, you see.
You can find that, and certainly talking to previous people that have sort of had a series of residencies, I think you do sometimes find you kind of get a sort of burnout kind of thing where I mean, I've talked to people that have sort of had 3 or 4 residencies in a row, and you just sort of get residency fatigue, where this sort of constant being able to do anything, or this constant sort of needing to produce.
It's hard if you don't have enough time to kind of reflect on your projects as well, and sort of think a bit more critically about them.
Yeah.
I know for myself, having said yes to 100 different things at the moment as well, that's the sort of the downside of being super busy.
Yeah.
But yeah.